Good day, friends. In today's video, I'll talk of two events which have taken the world by surprise and where there are two lessons for India to learn. And I am talking about the summit meeting in Alaska between President Trump and President Putin. And the second event is President Trump meeting up in the White House with Zelensky, NATO chief, and the EU leaders. Now, it is well known that President Trump is not that traditional American president who would interact with the allies, seek advice of the policy team, interact with his security establishment or his intelligence agencies to frame a policy. President Trump is a big deal maker and a successful one. So he has all the characteristics of a big successful deal maker, and they are four. Any deal maker, when he is interacting with a weaker party, will bully that party into submission to get a favorable deal. But when the deal maker is dealing with a equal partner, he would show respectability. He would be respectable because that is the only way to manage the deal. The third is that when dealing with an equal partner, the deal maker would always want to have a one-on-one interaction at the earliest, so that what the deal is about is very clear from the horse's mouth and the deal is closed after that. And the fourth is that a deal maker would always want to close the deal at the earliest before any external factors influence the deal. Now, once we understand these things about President Trump, it becomes very clear why he sent his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to Moscow, where he interacted with the policy making team there and he also met President Putin. When Witkoff came back, he told President Trump that yes, a deal can be struck with President Putin. And hence, the summit meeting happened in Alaska. Now, the point to note about this summit meeting is that President Trump literally laid out a red carpet welcome for President Putin, and the red carpet was right till his aircraft, something he's not done for any other foreign dignitary. Why? Because Trump was conscious of the fact that he was dealing with an equal, a leader of a great power. Because for the last 3.5 years, Russians have been fighting the war in Ukraine successfully against US backed NATO, and they are winning on the battlefield. And despite all the sanctions that have been put on Russia, Russia is the number one economy today in Europe. So he was conscious of all this. So he gave a lot of respect to President Putin. The two leaders sat down, they had 2.5 hours of talk, and what Trump got from Putin was priceless because he got the Russian perspective on what they thought was the genesis of the war, how it started, and how this could be brought to an end. This is something that Trump could not have got from his allies or from his own policy making team. So once he got it from the horse's mouth, Trump was very clear that he could now strike a deal with Putin that would help him in two ways. One, it would take forward his MAGA agenda, Make America Great Again agenda that he has promised to his voter base. And second, it would help Trump in cutting good economic deals with Putin. Now, you see, when we look at MAGA, MAGA has many elements. For example, MAGA is about taking the manufacturing back to America. It is also about reducing the national debt of America, which today stands at $37 trillion. It is also about ensuring that the big power influence is not there in Western Hemisphere, and the big power or the great power I'm referring to are China and Russia, and it is also about a security and technology competition with China in East Asia. But above all, it is about ending forever wars, because this is the most tangible of all the things what MAGA stands for. And this is about something that he has promised his voter base, that he'll be a peacetime president. He will not be a wartime president. He won't start the wars, he'll end the wars. And now he is repeatedly claiming that I have brought 6 wars to an end. And top of the list, he always mentions the India-Pakistan war because that war, he said, I got the ceasefire. Otherwise, it could have become a nuclear war. So he saw that opportunity to end the Ukraine war after his talk with Putin. And so the two leaders had a very brief interaction with the media, very brief. And as far as the Russophobic, the Western press is concerned, the American press is concerned, the Western analysts are concerned, most of them, they declared that this was a failure, this summit meeting, and Putin had got the better of Trump. And they even went to the extent of saying that Putin had got respectability, he was in isolation, now he's been brought back to the world stage, which is utter nonsense. Because what they don't seem to realize is that 80% of the world, which is global south, stands with Putin. And that 20% that they keep talking about, the Western world, is not really the world any longer. But this is a different story. But you see, for any discerning observer, it was very clear that this summit was a success. Because the parting shot of the two leaders was Trump publicly saying that he will get Zelensky, Ukraine, to talk directly now with Russia to end this war. And if he was required, he would be there. In other words, talking of a trilateral meeting. And Putin invited him in English to say that you must come to Moscow. That means the next summit to be held in Moscow. Now, immediately after Putin left for Moscow, Trump called up NATO chief and he called up Zelensky, the two people who matter. And it was Zelensky, then he got all the EU leaders, got them together, had an interaction with them, and everybody decided to come to the White House to argue the case of Zelensky. And the key thing about Zelensky's case was that there should not be a peace deal, there should be a ceasefire. But before they arrived, it was made clear by President Trump that there would be no ceasefire in Ukraine and there would be a peace deal only. And that Ukraine will not get the NATO membership. Then he also made it clear it will have to give up Crimea and there would be a land swap. But the security of both Russia and Ukraine would be kept in mind. And the security responsibility was given to the European leaders. And of course, the triumph would go to President Trump. So all this was made clear beforehand. Now we had the second part. We had these EU leaders there in the White House. And if you see the photograph which was released by the White House, they actually look like school children in front of a headmaster, not one of them saying anything to displease Trump. They were extremely helpless there. And the reason was simple, because they know very well that the Ukraine war cannot last even a week without the help of America. And NATO would come to an end. So they all were praises for President Trump. So it is more or less clear that it will be a trilateral meeting. It will be Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. And Zelensky also now is talking about a peace deal that would be more favorable. So what is the big lesson out of all this? As far as Trump is concerned, he would have learned a big lesson. And that is that if he wants to take the MAGA project forward, he has to himself manage the great power relationship by direct contact. And as I have repeatedly said in my videos, there are only three great powers in this multipolar world today, and they are America, China, and Russia. So he has already hinted earlier, President Trump has hinted that end of this year, he is likely to go to China to meet up with President Xi. So that seems to be very likely. So that is the lesson he would have learned after this interaction. And what is the lesson that India should learn? The lesson is simple, that India is not a great power. India is not even a power anywhere close to the EU nations because they have technology levels that India doesn't have. If they are to be treated like school children, India will be treated more shabbily by Trump as long as he's in power. And the reason for that is that as far as Trump is concerned, there is no strategic relationship he has today with India. Because unlike all his predecessors, which wanted India as a military bulwark against China, to have a role of a net security provider, including in combat in the Indian Ocean region. Trump does not want that. He has limited that security competition to East Asia. Nothing more than that. And what has upset him most is that India has refused to give the credit which he believes is due to him for having brought the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. So, despite all this, what Indians are trying to do, which is through the 13th February joint statement where India has said that we will take the bilateral trade to from the present $131 billion to $500 billion over the next 5 years. The fact of the matter is, and we have promised a lot, India has promised a lot, it doesn't mean much to Trump, because what Trump wanted has been denied to him. So we will see a lot of bullying by America, by President Trump. For example, now already there is a threat of a 50% tariff on the oil that India is getting from Russia, something that they are not putting on China, because China is a great power. Please remember that. And every day there will be trouble the next year, because next year is the BRICS presidency with India, and every day India will have trouble with Trump. Now, let me come to the second point. The second point is that please remember that today the world is under big changes. What that means is that in this multipolar world, the US based rule based order is over. That there are three great powers. All those three great powers can look after their sovereignty. But all the other countries, which is three powers minus 193 countries in the world today, either they have to look after their security or they need to have today their own security architecture. Ideally, a regional security architecture, because that rule based order of the Americans, as I said, is over. So, if you do not have that structure, you will be in trouble, just as we saw the state of the EU leaders. Today, the big problem of the EU leaders is that they have so much of hatred for Russia that they cannot think of having a security architecture with Russia inside the tent, which is the ideal thing that they should be looking for. They are quite willing to be the vessels and to be treated shabbily by Trump, and that is precisely what they will get. Now, as far as India is concerned, India has that option. India has the option to have a regional security architecture if India stopped seeing China as a rival and stopped seeing Pakistan as an enemy. If India starts seeing both these countries as partner, India can have a security architecture of its own. And as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, if there is a lesson that has to be learned from the EU leaders and how they've been treated, is the lesson is for don't put all your eggs in the Trump basket. There are options. There are options of BRICS. Next year is the BRICS presidency with India. There is SCO where the Prime Minister will be going very soon to China for the BRICS, for the SCO summit, and the time is limited. Why I say time is limited is because please understand that China, as a great power, it has what is called a new artificial intelligence development plan. This plan was started in 2017. It will be over in 2030. That means there is just 5 years where China has said in this plan it wants to be a leader in AI in the world. A leader. It is already a leader in green technology, sorry. So it wants to be a leader in big technology as well. And it is very much doable for China. I don't want to go in the details here. So why I'm saying time is less is because a lot of the countries of the global south, including in our neighborhood, they will be on the Chinese technology, which can create a lot of interoperability and security problems for India in the digital trade. So the point I am making here is very simple, that India has to rethink its foreign policy in the light of these two big things that I have just mentioned. And tomorrow I will do another video where I will talk about the visit of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in India and what it should mean for India. Thank you so much.